Yeah, Athens needs to be in timeout.
Welcome to Fringe Element here on the 440 Sports Network. My name is Braden Gall, and you can get to me on Twitter at Braden Gall.
Mine's Erin Dugan. You can find me on, God, I can't talk already.
Oh,
Find me
nice.
on Twitter at the Erin Dugan or Instagram Erin_Dugan. Strong start.
Does your company there have a culture problem? Is that the problem? Like you guys just out late partying and driving fast and racing and reckless driving and intoxication and damage to property, and
that would be more interesting. We are up late, but it's unfortunately not partying.
It's mostly just the work.
Work
that happens. So the NFL Combine came and went. Anthony Richardson flew by everybody as fast as possible, set every single record, the most athletic quarterback in the history of the Combine, and we told you so. So we're gonna touch on the Combine for just a minute. The big chunk of the show today will be dedicated to a fun activity, a fun exercise, a lighthearted offseason exercise, because the first part of the show is going to be a little heavier. But the main portion will be the most important game for every single team in 2023. You've got a list. I've got a list. We will debate. We will get to all 14 teams in the SEC. Adam Sparks going to join us from the Knoxville News Sentinel, giving us a Tennessee Volunteers State of the Union as we continue our State of the Union, spring State of the Union through the entire conference. So I want to make sure we do that. And, of course, special thanks to Chris and Jonathan, who both won hats last week from our good friends, University Traditions.
They knew?
Won it. Yep, they absolutely knew. And they both framed it in a form of a question. So major credit to those of you who listened to the end of the show last week and framed what is Vanderbilt dance team?
They both said the exact same thing?
Both said the exact same thing. So I said, you know what? You both get a hat from our good friends at University Traditions. Look, I still got some more left.
Go them.
Look, I got an Arkansas
That's
one
awesome.
left.
Those are sick.
The Ole Miss one. I'm sorry, Arkansas fans, I love you, but this Ole Miss one, awesome hat.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question before we get into the heavy subject.
Okay.
I was given a hat by my brother-in-law.
Okay.
And his wife for Christmas this year. He is a Nashvilleian. They lives in Florida, married into a Florida family.
Okay.
And I think you've seen this hat before.
I
have worn this hat many times, and we're about to talk about Georgia, so I'm not going to wear this hat now because it will clearly come off a certain way. What kind of hat is this? And if you're looking on YouTube, you can see it.
What does it say again?
What kind of hat is this? It says easy living on it. There's a picture of a gator eating what could be a citrusy-ish fruit, so maybe even an orange fruit, potentially.
So I'm not supposed to guess it.
Well, the question is,
are you asking me, or is this the trivia question?
No. This is I'm just talking to you about this. So
okay.
I've been accused.
Do you want me to talk back to you about it?
Yeah, like
it's a Florida hat.
It's a Floridian hat. There's
not a three Florida... things about it that are Florida.
It's from a Florida family, but he is a Tennessee guy, and he knows I'm a Tennessee alumni, and it's mostly just a hat that's from Florida. It just happens to also look like a Florida Gator hat. So I can't really wear it around town. You know what I mean? But
Easy living. Is that a shot at their scheduling?
I like that.
Maybe.
You just made up for all the stumbling you did right out of the gate. You're like,
I'm sleep deprived. I'm going to be weird today. I'm just going to warn everyone.
I get so many compliments from like young, cool people, which I am neither of.
Neither.
I went into like a really fancy shoe store to get some like really nice boots, and like the
what kind of boots?
Yeah, like the girl behind no free shouts. It's like all fancy leathers, and the girl behind the thing was like, "Man, that's a sweet hat," and I was like, "Yeah, my brother-in-law gave it to me because he's young and he's like 30." But it's clearly like it looks too much like a Florida Gators hat. You know what I mean?
He knew that, right?
I guess so. I don't think it occurred to his wife, who's a Miami Hurricanes fan.
Or maybe it did occur to his. Well, no, that wouldn't make a lot of sense.
He's a Tennessee guy.
Huh?
Yeah. It's just a dope hat. It's just a dope hat, man. All the young kids are talking about it.
She knew you were like hipstery and heady like that. Yeah, granola.
I wish.
You're not granola, but you are like East Nasty vibes.
True, but I cannot wear this hat with what we're about to discuss. Because if I clip it and put it on social wearing this hat, everyone's going to assume I am a giant Gators fan. Because Georgia, Your time has come, folks. The Georgia Bulldogs, come on down. Do you have a culture problem? Now, I hate this phrase, culture problem. I'm not a big fan of that cliche, Erin.
What is it about it? It's just too coach speaky, or what? It's not even coach speak. It's just
it's
cliche.
not specific enough. It's not. It doesn't define the situation. Like there's not tight ends murdering people at Georgia. You know,
True.
like that.
Yeah.
Like it's not like Kirby Smart is intentionally going about trying to like make people bad. Like you know what I mean?
No.
I think they are on their way to having a major problem.
Yeah.
That's where I want to start. So because I'm going to take it to a place that I don't think many SEC shows are going to take it. But let's give you some quick thoughts here. 9 players have been arrested since January of 2022. So a little over a year, we've got 9 arrests. Almost
just Georgia?
For Georgia, just Georgia. Almost all of them have resulted in little to no discipline from the legal system. A couple of them are extremely serious. We know, obviously, about Jalen Carter and the 2 young people who passed away tragically in a car accident, which is tragic. Stetson Bennett, public intox, no big deal. Okay, doesn't need to be that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But you also had Dumas Johnson, the linebacker, 5 days earlier, arrested for racing and reckless driving. Trayvon Walker, the number 1 pick last year, drove into 2 cars late at night in April of 2022. Very late at night. No citation. Nothing. Kenny McIntosh, April 25th, 4 a.m. He got into a crash going 20 over. A woman was in the hospital. Reckless driving charge. Nolan Smith, who just dominated the combine, was going 89 and a 55, and he got a, quote, pretrial diversion program. That's it. And I got some more on Nolan Smith in just a second. Javon Bullard got a DUI with 7 misdemeanors. There's an actual charge. Even the long snapper was destroying property when intoxicated.
That's normally the most low-key player on the team, besides maybe like a third-string kicker.
2 misdemeanors, simple battery for Warren Brinson. Ra Thomas, a transfer who didn't even play in the national championship games, got a felony for false imprisonment. But I want to take, so that's just like in the last.
What's false imprisonment again?
It was like holding a woman against her will, basically. But
again,
you have to go read about the story. By and large, not just Kirby in Georgia, but the legal system. One of these was when Jalen Carter first got pulled over. He was in September. He was doing 89 and a 45, and the police officer said, "You need to chill out, or you're going to eventually go to jail." Nothing happened. Got nothing. No, not a ticket, not a citation, nothing. So I say all this not to be like, oh, it's all Kirby's fault. It's not. It's not. That's not what I'm saying here. I want to go back to Isaiah Wilson. Now, I don't know if you remember Isaiah Wilson, Erin.
I don't really.
Isaiah Wilson was a first-round draft pick in 2020 from the Georgia Bulldogs. He skipped his senior season. He was drafted in the first round by the Tennessee Titans here in Nashville. Before he played 4 total combined snaps in the NFL. First-round pick. $11 million contract, $6 million guaranteed. In August, before the season started, he was arrested for jumping off a balcony at Tennessee State University. He was then arrested for driving under the influence, and he was doing donuts on Charlotte Avenue, which is a major thoroughfare leaving downtown Nashville.
Yes.
With a BAC well above the legal limit.
Mm-hmm.
He then he's put on COVID list twice. He plays 3 snaps in 1 game. He is then arrested for driving 140 miles an hour in Georgia and felony fleeing from police, possession of Schedule I controlled substances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He is no longer in the NFL. First-round draft pick, lottery ticket from God to change his family's life forever financially.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I bring Isaiah Wilson up is not only did I cover him firsthand here in Nashville when I was covering the Titans, but that this is not just the last 13 months since they've won 2 national titles. This goes back further.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the car thing. I don't understand why the car thing keeps coming up. Clearly, these players are allowed to do whatever they want driving around Athens. Now, I don't think this is a Kirby Smart creating a bad culture issue. I think this is, and I know I'm on a soapbox here, so I want you to chime in whenever you feel comfortable.
No, I'm just kind of letting you rant, and then I got stuff to say.
I think what happens is a couple of different things all happen at the same time. To win national championships in college football, you got to recruit players that maybe aren't the exact perfect picture of what you want, because sometimes you're willing to take the best possible athletes and maybe not always the best possible people. That's
Yes.
that's one tiny force at play here. The microscope and the spotlight gets way brighter and way stronger and picks up on every single blemish and wart in your program. And you have to be treated differently when you're the 2-time national champion than when you are, 2-10 or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that's another outside force that's taking place here. I don't think there's a culture problem at Georgia, but it is not a collection of individual incidents the way Stetson Bennett framed it at the Combine. This is a program on a path. It is on a trajectory to ending up in a place where all of this comes home to roost at some point. And right now is the moment that Kirby Smart, the athletic department, the football program, the football team, the coaches, the AD, whatever, they can put an end to all of this stuff if they make some big statements here inside the program, not outside the program, but inside the program. They don't have a bad culture, but if Kirby doesn't do something to stop this behavior where they clearly are told they can do whatever the hell they want with no repercussions, then we are going to be headed into a place where they do have a major culture problem. Does that all make sense?
It all does make sense, and I agree with you on most of the stuff that you just said. I'm not, but I would maybe go a little further and say I don't think Kirby Smart created a bad culture, but I use, and I hate to talk about this all the time, but I spent so much time with Vanderbilt baseball that all I can think about when stuff like this happens is like, what would Tim Corbin do, the head coach at Vanderbilt? And this would have been, this never would have happened. And he recruits at the highest level. I will say, because the size of a football roster, there's a lot more kids on it. Sometimes baseball is a more expensive sport. Sometimes like kids that had, higher income families and therefore maybe had some more support at home were more likely to play baseball. We've seen that baseball really needs to step their game up in terms of including minorities and figuring out a way to get, different cultural socioeconomic groups into the sport, but it is an expensive one. So that kind of creates a little bit of a separation between who you recruit in football and sometimes who you recruit in baseball. But if this had happened this would not have happened underneath Tim Corbin. And if it did, no questions asked. If you put somebody else's life in jeopardy, if you're acting entitled, if you're doing stupid stuff or doing dangerous stuff, you're gone. And then everybody sees that you're gone, and the next person maybe isn't doing that or doesn't feel as invincible. I mean, I don't think Kirby Smart is a bad guy or created a bad culture, but I do think that they are not nixing what is creating a bad culture, which is, I know at some certain point you do have to recruit at the highest level if you want to be the best. But there's a really slippery slope there of that sweet spot to where you're getting the best talent in, but you're not sacrificing values and you're not bringing people in because it's contagious. We saw what's happened with LSU and behavioral issues in the past. Like if you got guys at the top acting up, going out during COVID, drinking, partying, well, guess what? Everybody thinks it's okay. And all of a sudden you've got where did LSU's chaos trickle down from? If the coaching staff.
Yes, if the two head coaches are willing to cover it up, that's where I think there's that's more of a defined culture creation problem at LSU.
Totally.
Under Les Miles.
This is starting at the next level down. It's not starting at the top, but it is happening in the program, and it's not being nixed by the top. Right. And it's going to be replicated by other guys in the program, and they see what you can get away with. Georgia, Athens law enforcement. Because everyone there is hardcore, like Georgia fans. They're letting these kids probably get away with a little bit more, but you have to set the tone for what's okay and what's not. And when there's danger and people's lives in jeopardy and dangerous activity, I would venture to say this is going to continue to go down this path if you don't send a very strong message as the coaching staff at Georgia.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a difference between Art Briles, and what's going on at Georgia. I just think we're talking about two very different levels of stuff. We're talking, but again, what happens when you win at this level? There's kind of two big things that happen when you win at this level. Number one, you might have cut corners to your point about character to get talent.
Yeah.
That's part of the process. I see, and that's not a Georgia thing. That's an everywhere in college athletics thing. And that's actually not even college athletics. That's the whole world.
Right.
That applies to every business. Like if you're a great mortgage bond trader, but you're an asshole, you probably are going to get a mortgage bond job, and you're probably going to go out there and make a bunch of money for your company. Like that's not a new thing. But what happens is two things happen in college athletics specifically, and it's packaged with very young men, very young, impressionable people that are already not fully formed frontal lobes, like that are making mistakes, because that's what happens. All of us did. I did it. We all make mistakes in college.
Right.
And what I think is interesting is the two big things that happen is, one, you are empowered with your success in your community. The more you win, the more power you have inside your little bubble. And the bubble gets tighter, and like the bubble gets less transparent as you win more. So the more you win, the less people hold you accountable or know what's really going on.
Yeah, you become a celebrity, and
Bingo.
Entitlement.
Have you watched the Murdoch documentaries?
I have not, but I have heard.
I just got done with them. Like that 17-year-old kid literally was never told no his entire life. But that's neither here nor there. Far more dramatic, far more dramatic circumstances. But then again, and then the other thing that happens is the spotlight and the focus and the attention and all the love, all that leads to more and more stuff being focused on your program, as I said. And so, one guy gets arrested for public intox, not a big deal at like Kentucky or Tennessee or Missouri right now, because they're not the two-time defending champions. They're not held to the same standard as the way we now view Kirby Smart and Georgia as the gold standard of college football. And that you could say that's unfair if you want to, but that's just the reality. So you've got these little feudal dictator egomaniacs that run these totally, opaque, lack of transparency, little bubble communities where every time you win a game, those athletes get more and more empowered. The coaches get more and more empowered. The athletic directors get more and more empowered. The boosters feel better and better. And it's not a Georgia problem. This happens everywhere. It happens everywhere. And it's happening now to Georgia. And let me end this on one story I heard from the Combine this week, because Nolan Smith went up there and had a great weekend. 4.3, 940, elite-looking pass rusher coming off the pectoral injury. Everybody loves Nolan Smith. Of course, he was on the list that I just read off, doing 89 and a 55, no repercussions. I was told this is not a huge deal. This is not a criminal offense. This is not anything, but it is a sign, and it is absolutely something that NFL scouts talk about. And I know I've heard a lot of these stories about a lot of players. Nolan Smith is kind of an asshole to people the entire weekend in Indianapolis. And you know this because you've shot video as a production crew person, right? Like you've been on the production crew. These guys go in and out of dressing rooms and in and out of production studios with NFL Network, with ESPN, with in and out of meetings with general managers.
Teams, yeah.
There are young women everywhere just doing their jobs. And if how you treat those people is noticed by talent evaluators and by scouts and by GMs. And I did not hear positive things about how Nolan Smith, for example, behaved this weekend in Indianapolis.
Yeah, it is very telling. I will say some general managers will probably care more than others, but it is, what team was it that their coach went viral for pulling all the female staff members to the front of the classroom?
Oh, I don't remember that.
Oh my God. Who was it? I'm just totally blanking.
And I don't say that about Nolan Smith to be like, oh, don't draft him. Like, no, he's a fine player. He deserves a shot at his career, and he's going to have he probably is going to be a really good NFL player. It's a tiny nugget. It's a tiny anecdote that indicates that these guys at Georgia right now pretty much feel like they can do whatever they want. And that is now on Kirby to manage that. It's not that it's his fault or that there's a bad culture. It's that this is what happens when you are a two-time defending champion. And this is how it works. This is what you have to deal with when you're at this level. And it's now on the coaching staff and the leaders in the locker room and the people in the front office, or I guess the administration, to try to put an end to all of this.
This is the hardest
the racing is ridiculous. The number of people doing 150 miles an hour is absurd. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. This is the hardest part. To me, this is where you define a program that is like a legacy program versus a program that is playing at an elite level for a a certain amount of time. And this is the defining moment, I think, for Georgia,
Mm-hmm.
because you know you can win. You've got the talent in place to do that. You've got the coaching staff around you that's capable. This is taking your program from winning a lot to being a legacy program, and that comes in discipline. That's where you go from talent back in a reverb towards discipline and sending the right message and being willing to part with people who are toxic to your culture, even if they are the one of the fastest guys on the team or are super talented. You have to recognize, but it takes a lot of talent and it takes a lot of resources and talent in place to be able to part with those people. But this is that moment for Georgia, is can you now make it last? And
Bingo.
making it last comes in the form of
Bingo.
discipline, respect, humility, and making sure that you don't sacrifice those things for anything, and then hope that you continue
Yep.
to get the right guys through the door. It's hard to do.
Well, and we'll move on because we're not sitting here trying to lecture, but like this is the reality. I think you're exactly right to spin this forward. I don't think there's some sort of massive culture problem that Kirby Smart has created. This happens on its own. And when it happens, the sign of Urban Meyer versus Nick Saban is Urban Meyer can't keep it together. It burns out. Icarus, right? You fly too close to the sun, you burn out and you die.
Yeah.
Florida burnt out because Urban Meyer couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And all the warts came out, and it was way worse than what Georgia's dealing with right now, right? Like way worse.
And you're riding and dying on the talent wave, and then things will fluctuate, and then you have behavioral issues and then lack of discipline. You're just riding this wave with the kids instead of getting there and then being like, we won't sacrifice the way that we do things for anybody. Your staff buys in more, the guys, and then you have guys gravitating towards you because you're like, that is the pro, and their parents want them there. Like that's the program that's right. But
Right.
it's a hard balance to strike. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it.
Can you keep people grounded? Can you keep them focused? Can you keep them disciplined? Can you keep them hungry? Can you keep them working towards the goal? Like this is what makes Nick Saban better than everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
Better than Les Miles and Coach O, and better than Urban Meyer, and better than even Pete Carroll had some discipline problems at USC. Like it happens to every one of these programs.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, can you kind of like stop it, control it, manage it, and then evolve beyond it? And that's what right now Kirby Smart's he's got to do that the next couple of years. And we don't know until 3 more years from now if he can handle it or not,
And I'm not saying that Saban is like fully, I don't know if it's fair to say that every time there's been a behavioral issue that Saban has jumped on it, but I do think
he's had plenty of his own issues. There's no question.
Right. But you do have the liberty when you get to a certain level in your Alabama as we know them traditionally, to be like, oh, you're going to act like that? Get the hell out.
Saban
And
doesn't care.
And yeah, he'll get rid of you. You don't want to be there. Well, guess what? We don't need you. You're just a piece of the puzzle for us. And there's 5 other guys that are waiting to take over as soon as you mess up. So get out of the way. And then you'll send a message that there's just not room for that stuff.
Like, you think, I think the other coach at Alabama is missing some of that accountability. That's different subject altogether. As I'm watching my guy, John Morant, act stupid in the NBA and get held accountable by both his coach himself, his PR team, and the NBA. Didn't do anything really that wrong. I mean, he made the mistake with the young person, but not with the Instagram live or whatever. Yeah. And he's suspended indefinitely, basically. And anyway, I don't want to go off on a tangent there.
Yeah.
Okay. Quickly, Anthony Richardson in the combine. Anthony Richardson, Adam Sparks going to join us coming up. Tennessee State of the Union. Anthony Richardson is the most statistically, factually, the most athletic quarterback in the history of the combine. I don't know if I have anything else to add to that. I think he's going to be a really good player in the NFL. I think somebody needs to be patient with him. But I think we told you last week this guy's going to blow people away. And sure enough, literally, factually, statistically, the most athletic quarterback in the history of the NFL combine.
A 4.43 at 244 pounds and a 40.5 inch vertical. That's high and fast.
He said
you're gonna clip that. You're out. Watch. Braden's gonna clip that piece for social. That's high and fast.
The longest broad jump in the history of quarterbacks. I think the vertical, biggest vertical in the history of quarterbacks.
Yep.
And again, as you mentioned, faster than Cam Newton, Tim Tebow, and just as big. So Anthony Richardson, folks, I don't think he's going to be top 5. I talked to a scout. I don't think he's going top 5. I think he's going to be like 6 or 7, but I don't think he makes it past like 8 or 9. I think the Panthers or the Seahawks or somebody goes up and gets him. So
how do you think he
also crushed
fares
interviews
in
by
the
way.
league? Yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
Crushed interviews.
What do you, if you had to guess his trajectory, make up a hypothetical for Anthony Richardson's career?
There's 2 of them. If he's thrown into starting right away, there's a chance he never fully develops, and maybe that slows his growth and he doesn't realize his potential. I think it's if somebody is willing to let him sit behind a starting quarterback, like, I don't know, Ryan Tannehill for the Tennessee Titans.
Mm-hmm.
If you're gonna let him sit behind, because he's not raw, he's inexperienced, but man, the most athletic quarterback in the history of the game.
Very impressive.
According to the combine.
You do something like that and you interview the way he does, because the interviews do matter. It's you're sitting pretty.
And Bryce Young small. I think we told you guys all these narratives last week about all these guys. Hendon Hooker's a joy to be around. Okay, all right. Let's get into let's switch moods here and be lighthearted for a little while. You want to do that?
Yeah, let's do that.
All right, so completely lighthearted here. All right.
Okay.
Completely subjective. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder here. Okay.
Okay.
I want you. We're going to go back and forth. We're going to go alphabetical in the West, then alphabetical in the East, and we're going to go most important game of 2023 to have some fun, lighten the mood here before we get to Adam Sparks and our Tennessee State of the Union. What do you think? Sound fun?
That works. Yep. Let's do it.
All right. Which means Alabama, number 1, alphabetically, of course. Alabama, Aaron Dugan. What is the most important game for Bama in 2023?
I think LSU on the 28th of October. What do you think?
Are you going to give me any explanation? You got to say something more than just.
I just think that LSU is on the rise, and Alabama is trying to quote unquote reverb from what is not at the typical Alabama team that we're used to seeing, because the standard and the bar is set so high that if they even have a still way above average season, everyone, including themselves, think they suck. Yep. So LSU has actually shown insane progress quickly under Brian Kelly, and they will be, for the first time in a couple years, the team to beat. And I think I just think that's going to be an interesting one. And I think the reason I think it's the most important, at least in my mind, is because it tells me a lot about both of them. I think it's a really good gauge to measure where LSU is, and I think the same thing about Alabama. So maybe that's most important game to me as opposed to the most important game for Alabama, but that's what it
feels like it's the only game. I have LSU November 4th, week 10 as well. Both teams coming off a bye.
Oh, I had the date wrong, huh?
I've got it as November 4th. I don't know what day you said.
Okay, I put October 28th. I don't know where I got that.
That's the bye week. They're off the week before, but
got it.
This is the only game, I think, of all 14 teams that you could argue is potentially a de facto division championship game. I don't know if Tennessee, Georgia is going to be in that same boat. You know, Alabama will play at Mississippi State early in the year in September, at A&M on October 7th. That's a tough stretch there where they're going to go Mississippi State on the road, A&M on the road, then Arkansas and Tennessee at home back to back. But they can do that. Then it's LSU at home. And that could be the game that decides the West. And the only other one I wrote down was at Auburn, because even if you go 10-1 up into that point in the Iron Bowl in week 13, even if you just slip up one time, Auburn could get you at the end and knock you out of a playoff spot. So I think it's LSU with a bullet. So I'm going to see how many we have that we match. So far, we're 1 for 1.
Okay.
The Arkansas Razorbacks, and this is where it gets interesting because there's so many important games. Who you got?
Well, I did this. I mean, since we're doing them back to back, it's going to seem like I'm going LSU on everything. But I did pick LSU on this game mainly because of where they were in the schedule. Because I think that I mean, obviously BYU is not the easiest game in the world. They start out with Western Carolina, Kent State, then BYU, then LSU. So it being the first conference game and the momentum that they could create by potentially going 4-0 if they could knock off BYU, to me made it the most interesting, because I think it just sets the tone, because then you got some momentum to see if you can take out A&M, to see if you can make a move against Ole Miss. And then obviously you've got that Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, Ole Miss, Alabama, Mississippi State stretch is going to be really difficult. So if you can go into that 4-0, I think that's going to be just completely mentally make the difference for that program.
Like, my brain was sort of in the same place as you, but I went with the Texas A&M game the following week, which is week 5, September 30th, which again is at AT&T Stadium. It's almost always a neutral site game. It's almost always batshit crazy football game with some bizarro weird ending. But I agree with you that, because to me, I'll give him the loss at LSU, let's say hypothetically, but that makes, if you lose to LSU, even though you start 3-0, you lose to LSU in your Arkansas, you are, to your point, you're then staring at A&M, Ole Miss, Bama, Mississippi State, Florida, Auburn with one bye week mixed in there. That's a ridiculous stretch. And if you lose at LSU, it's not the end of the world. But if you go 0-2 in the SEC and you lose to A&M the next week, then you're staring at road trips to Ole Miss and Bama, and then you're looking at 0-4. So I put A&M down as the number one game because I thought that's the one spot where you could kind of stop the bad momentum from an LSU game and give yourself some positive juju going into the Ole Miss game that, frankly, Arkansas and Ole Miss have been crazy. That game's been fun and wild and ridiculous. So
right,
that's where I went. I like where I like where your head's at there. This is an interesting one and a tough one for me. Auburn Tigers. Where'd you go?
No, you go first on this one.
I wrote down at Arkansas, which is the second to last SEC game, November 11th. That would be week 11 at Arkansas. Now, I think you could argue there's a lot of swing games here for Auburn. Mississippi State at home, Ole Miss at home. You got the big games, right? Their schedule, by the way, is insane. At Texas A&M, Georgia, at LSU, and then you got Bama. But I went with the at Arkansas game because it's near the end and it could be for bowl eligibility for Auburn.
Okay, yeah.
And if they win on the road at Vanderbilt the week, like, you get both Mississippi schools at home, then you go at Vandy. You could win a bunch of those games. You could win 2 of those, maybe 3 of those games. And if you can beat Arkansas on the road, which we've seen, the Auburn-Arkansas game also has been insane with fumbles and bad calls and stuff lately. If you can win at Arkansas on the road, that probably gives you your 6th win. You beat New Mexico State the following week. You might get to 7 wins, and I think you're talking about a really successful season under Hugh Freeze. And even if you lose the Iron Bowl, you feel good about where you're at under Hugh Freeze.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. Yeah, especially with the bowl eligibility factor and all of that. Mine was also based on, I found myself those games that are seemingly like winnable or kind of sort of even,
Yep.
like those are the games that I leaned towards, but also factoring in where they fell in the schedule, because I've just seen how much that players and coaching staff even ride that mental wave of, oh, now we're 4-0, we can do another one, or we just got our ass kicked 3 weeks in a row and we can't get back out of it. And now we don't think we're good. So for that reason, I picked Auburn. I picked Ole Miss, which is on October 21st. They go through this stint of having, like you kind of mentioned, A&M on the 22nd of September. Then you've got Georgia, and then you have LSU. So if you, let's say that all 3 of those games end up really tough for them, if you can't get out of it at Ole Miss and reset, your season's going to go to shit.
Yep.
So
I agree.
And then maybe if you have the confidence, you can do Mississippi State, and then you got to try to build momentum on Vandy and keep going.
Yep.
So I think it's that Ole Miss reset, like after those 3 tough weeks, that makes that one important.
I had Ole Miss written down as a top 3 game for sure. My number 2 was at A&M because of what you just said, that week number 4. Because here, think about, imagine the Plains. You beat UMass, you go to Cal and you win that game. You beat Samford, you're probably 3-0.
Yep.
If you figure out a way to go to A&M and win that game and start 4-0, people are going to be going batshit crazy in Auburn. Now,
yeah,
they're going to come right back down to earth against Georgia and LSU. But you get a home game against probably number 1 Georgia at 4-0. good night. That place will be bonkers. So
Totally.
I Arkansas was my number one game because that's about bowl eligibility at the end. But I had A&M and Ole Miss, the two, right next to each other. LSU. I have a feeling we're going to agree on this one.
I bet we are.
At Bama.
I'll go first for 2, and then you go first for 2. Yeah, it's got to be Bama.
I've got Bama. Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I don't. There's not a ton to say about. I mean,
no.
We already kind of talked about this a little bit anyway, because it's Alabama. It's what we said for Alabama too.
You beat Alabama if you're good enough to go into Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama on the road on Saturday, November 4th, you are probably good enough to win the SEC or at least be in the SEC title game and maybe even make the playoff.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another one I'm going to throw at you though for LSU fans. Week 1 against Florida State. It's a non-conference game. It's a neutral site game. It doesn't feel like it should be that important, right? But that's a preseason potential top 10 Florida State team that beat you last year on the last play of the game. If you go down into Orlando and you hammer Florida State or you beat them and you get a big W, it sets you up for the entire rest of the season.
Yeah.
Because, again, you look at that schedule, Grambling State, they'll be favored. Even though they're at Mississippi State, they'll be favored. Arkansas at home, they'll be favored. At Ole Miss, they'll be favored. At Missouri, winnable game, favored. Auburn at home, favored. Army, you beat Florida State, you are probably 8-0 going to Alabama.
Yeah. I mean,
oh boy,
I don't have any argument for that.
I'm already
no further
excited.
questions.
I'm already excited about college football. All right, Mississippi State. I wrote down the Egg Bowl here because I think there's a good chance that the winner has a winning record, and the loser might be 6-6. I think they're both very good teams. I think they're both bowl eligible teams. I don't know. I just think Mississippi State, like, their schedule is kind of weird. They get Bama and LSU at home, but they're both early in the season. I don't know if they can win either one of those games. You got to go to Arkansas and Auburn later. I wrote down the Egg Bowl, but also it's kind of the Egg Bowl. So what you got? It's not hard to argue that one. This is hard. This was hard for me because there are that kind of like middle tier of the SEC. I have some question marks around exactly what it's going to be like. So there's some games where you're like, oh, what do I think about Arkansas and what's Auburn going to be like? And is Kentucky going to be what they've been the last several years? And can you win them? So a lot of this had to do with order for me. So they've got Southeastern Louisiana first week of the year, then Arizona, then they've got that LSU, South Carolina, Alabama situation. I picked South Carolina. I think Mississippi State will win that, but it's because it's wedged into in between those two really important games. That's the difference between potentially going, if you don't win that one, you could go 0-3 in the SEC, and that's really not going to be good for mental health. And then you've got to just keep going and then you'll get Western Michigan as like a reset after Alabama. And a bye week after that.
And a bye week. So you could potentially, if you can win South Carolina, you can go 4-2, which just sets you up for success for the rest of the season. Or at least for a bowl eligibility factors.
I'm going to clip this and send it to your friends that you said Mississippi State's going to win at South Carolina.
I didn't 23rd. Say that.
You did too. You said that you think
I
they're
said they
win.
Need to.
No, you said you think they're going to win.
I think they might.
I think they might too. I'm just saying.
Well,
you hate South Carolina too. It's fine. It's okay.
I get a pat. That's not true. You're just trying to bring me down with you, and I'm not going to stand for it.
Just a bunch of cock commanders down there. All right. The old Mississippi Rebels. Who you got? Number one most important game.
Your turn.
I said Egg Bowl.
You did go first.
You go first this time.
Okay. So, oh no, I lost it.
Convenient.
I really did.
Ole Miss at Tulane is going to be such a fun game.
And
that's so much
Tulane
Gulf.
is
It's like
even
so much Gulf Coast already.
Preseason top 20. I mean, I could almost just go with that because preseason top 20, Tulane, and setting the tone for the year. I mean, I think that's going to be a really good game. We're going to get more out of that than we would normally get from a non-conference
quit stalling.
team.
Did you find your notes?
Should I just go with it? No, I didn't.
I wrote down my top 3 for Ole Miss because to your point, we don't know exactly what these teams are going to be, but I think Ole Miss is going to be pretty good. I didn't have those same feelings last year, but I have those feelings this year. LSU at Auburn at Mississippi State. So the Egg Bowl's got to be on there. At Auburn on October 21st, coming off of the bye week. before the Vandy game and the A&M game at home could be a huge 3-game stretch for them. But I wrote LSU at home is the biggest game because they're at home following the Bama game. So you lose to Bama. If you lose to LSU, you're 0-2 in the SEC. If you beat LSU at home, which is very possible. If you beat LSU at home, it completely changes the direction of your season on September 30th. That's week number 5. So LSU on the road, one of their more difficult road trips of the season for a team that's preseason top 10, probably LSU. I like Ole Miss at home. Give me the Magnolia Bowl hosting the Tigers as the most important game for LSU or for Ole Miss. Sorry.
I went Arkansas right after that. I think it's definitely winnable for Ole Miss.
Yep.
Those games have been like relatively close. Was it last year that game was so crazy?
It's been fun, yeah. Last couple years.
Ole Miss, Arkansas. Because because you've already had LSU and Alabama right before it, that could put you at 4-0, and then you could easily go ahead and get to bowl eligibility in the next 2 weeks following that.
Yep.
With Auburn and Vanderbilt. And then if you can do that, maybe you have the momentum to take out A&M before you get to Georgia. So I thought that game wedged right after LSU, because even if things go horribly awry with Alabama and LSU, you get back on track with Arkansas, and then maybe knock out the 3 in a row, starting with Arkansas and then going Auburn, Vanderbilt. So reach bowl eligibility even with 3 or 4 games left in the season.
That's a good one. I like that. Texas A&M. I went with the very first SEC game for Hugh Freeze, the very first SEC game for Bobby Petrino at Texas A&M, and the start of the entire run for Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M. Auburn at home. Week number 4, September 23. You beat Auburn at home. You then have Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, Ole Miss. It is brutal for Texas A&M.
Damn.
If you lose to Auburn at home to start your conference record, it is not going to be pretty in College Station. It is critical that they win that game.
Yeah. This one was tough for me. I went back and forth between. Also, I didn't acknowledge you on that. Your reasoning is sound.
It's okay. Thank you. It's fine.
I teetered back and forth with Arkansas, not only because of like that, the stakes of that game comes with, and that there's some culture around it now, but also for the same reason you were talking about Auburn, of where it falls in the whole trajectory of their season. I ended up going with Tennessee, which felt random.
I love where you're going with this.
Because Texas A&M is teetering on like falling out of that top tier of the SEC that they sat in for several years, and Tennessee is teetering on being in it and staying in it. And I think because of how much we can learn about these two particular teams from that game, and the fact that if Texas A&M can come out of the Alabama, what seems to be a probable loss to me, out of the Alabama week and reset before Tennessee, then they're going to be in a better position, and we'll learn a lot about both. I would give it to Tennessee, though. I don't know if Texas A&M will pull it off. It's in Knoxville. So although I think Tennessee will win it, I think it's extremely important for the Aggies.
I think it's almost more important for Tennessee, but I love the game having way more importance than anybody realizes. It's one of those random crossovers that you're like, well, that game's happening now. Okay, fine. Like once every 7 years.
Right.
I think actually the night that the overtime game happened, Tennessee at A&M with Alvin Kamara, whatever, and all that whole entire game, that was the night we went into the hospital after the game, and I may or may not have had to sober up to go to the hospital so that my wife could give birth to our first child.
Really?
The following day. Yeah.
Jeez, Braden.
We had a big old party. They had a big old party. She was fine. We had gone to the doctor the day before. There was no, the doctor was like, yeah, you're weeks away. So we had a big old party. She went home early from the party because the game went into overtime. I proceeded to slow down and sober up and drink a lot of water. And then by about kickoff of the Pac-12 games that night, by about 10, 11 o'clock at night, we were heading to the hospital for sure. Walking around, trying to, loosen some stuff up.
That's good for Haley. She's
Texas
such a
A&M.
freaking trooper.
Texas A&M, Tennessee. I'm going to get to Texas A&M, Tennessee when we talk about the Vols. Florida, Tennessee at home. This is they got to go. Their schedule is so ridiculously difficult. They play every single good team. They play Florida State in the non-conference. They play Utah in the non-conference. This is a very difficult schedule. They're at South Carolina. They're at Kentucky. You got Georgia in the neutral field. They got to play at LSU. Like, it is an absurdly difficult schedule. And one of the few chances to pull an upset over a rival at home is Tennessee in week 3. And it will set the tone for the entire season for Florida.
I also have that game. It sticks out. You glance at their schedule and it pops off pretty quick. It's just not, they're not at a Georgia level anymore. I mean, that game used to be a lot more even than it is right now. And a lot of, that the answer to that many years prior to that to now would have been Georgia, Florida, but right now it's Florida, Tennessee, no question.
And in fact, I think Tennessee is the most important game for a lot of teams. So let's get to Georgia, because I think the most important game is at Tennessee. November 18th at Tennessee. Now, look, they're going to play Ole Miss at home. Tricky game. Could be tricky.
You got to go first on all the ones we agreed about.
That's good. That's good. I planned that. Florida, of course, in Jacksonville. At Auburn early in the season could be tricky. September 30th, the Deep South's oldest rivalry. I get that. But they are going to be a heavy favorite in every single game that they play. They get South Carolina at home. They get Kentucky at home. They get Missouri at home. Like, they're not going to lose a game. Georgia's not, again. And the only one could be November 18th. And Adam Sparks is about to talk about this. Depending on who's playing quarterback for Tennessee at the time, that could be that could be by far, clearly, easily, not even questionable, the most difficult game on the schedule for Georgia. And it's different. Florida's got so many tough games that they need to win one. Georgia has so many easy games that this is the only one that stands out as very difficult. So that's why I made it Tennessee.
Yeah, there's just a lot to lose. It's just a lot on the line for Georgia. And I think even if that's the only, then they've got their rivalry week.
Rivalry week.
It never works out for me on that.
Yeah.
After that against Tech. And so, like, Tennessee, although I don't think anything's going to keep this team out of the playoffs. It could keep
You're talking about Georgia out of the
playoffs. But they're getting in no matter what. In my mind, I don't see a reason why they wouldn't. But just it's more about placement for them, and if they're heavily favored in everything, can they keep up with the standard that's being set for them preseason? Right. And can they win every game in the regular season? And if they don't, I think it will be that Tennessee game. It
feels like you could just pick a loss and give them a loss somewhere. A game they're not supposed to lose, which is extremely unlikely, and just give it to them. And then that Tennessee game maybe becomes a division title game. But even then, even if they lose it, there's the odds of Tennessee being 6-2 in conference at that time and winning the game against Georgia seem very small. And so you can almost just it's almost like what they're going for is the three-peat and perfection, and that's the stakes, not like winning the division. Like, they're going to win the division.
Yeah, it's a perfection. It's like, can you go 12-0?
Right. All right, Kentucky, you're going to see a theme here. Tennessee. Go ahead.
No, you go first. Well, you already said it. I don't have Tennessee as the most important.
Okay,
one.
I'll real quickly here. October 28th, Halloween weekend, coming off a bye week. You're at home. This rivalry game for Stoops he's gone poorly for him. They have lost to Jeremy Pruitt. They've lost to Butch Jones. They've lost to bad teams, and they've lost to good Tennessee teams. If Kentucky, they've got to play, their schedule is really hard too, like at Georgia, Alabama, at South Carolina, at Louisville. They've got a tough schedule.
I mean, it's backloaded AF.
Very heavily, yes. And it begins after the bye week with the Tennessee game. And if you win that Tennessee game, you feel a little bit better about where you're headed. And frankly, this could be a team fighting for bowl eligibility. And it's an older rivalry than people think. I will take Kentucky. That's 3 straight where the most important game is going to be Tennessee. This is what's happened to you, Tennessee. You are the hunted now, man. You're not Georgia, but you're the most important game for a lot of teams, in my opinion. Who you got?
I went is this week 5? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I went week 5, Kentucky, Florida at Kentucky. So they're at home. The reason being, and obviously Tennessee pops off the page when you're staring at all these schedules, but if Kentucky can pull it off against Florida, they could be bowl eligible before Tennessee. And I think that makes the stakes a little bit lower. I'm not saying that knocking off Florida would be easy, because I think that would be naive of me. But you're starting with Ball State, Eastern Kentucky, Akron, and Vanderbilt. I mean, this schedule could not be more like backloaded, back heavy
Mhm.
if they tried. Then you have Florida, which is the only one of those that I just named that even seems like a more even matchup. And then if you could pull that off, you've gone 5-0. You have Georgia the next week, and then you have Missouri after that. So if you can pull it off, you beat Missouri, then you're bowl eligible for Tennessee, meaning that the stakes are lower. And sometimes that people take their foot off the gas a little bit, but oftentimes people have confidence and the pressure's off and they've got confidence that they can go forward.
No,
So
I
that
like
could
it.
go either way, but yeah, that's what I went with.
Kentucky at South Carolina, second to last week of the year, the last SEC game of the season for both those teams, November 18th. That could be incredibly important for both teams. That's another one. But I'm
They're
with
gonna
you.
be tired
I
at
had
that point.
Florida. I had Florida written down as well. There's no question about that. The Missouri Tigers, the most important game for the Missouri Tigers. What you got?
Missouri Tigers. I'm not organized today, y'all.
I think it's a two.
Um,
I think it's a 2-game stretch actually.
honestly, uh, I went back and forth on this one too, and I don't think I ever put a definitive answer down. I mean, if they could pull off that Kansas State game on the 16th of September, that would set a pretty powerful tone. I
Yeah,
mean, Kansas State's going to
I like
be
that. I like that.
very good. I think I'm going to go with that because I think Missouri is still one of those teams that's kind of finding their footing and figuring out their level of confidence and what they're
Mhm.
capable of. So I think the beginning of the season is pretty important for them.
That's a non-conference game over a good team, and if you win at home, you're 3-0. Then you got Memphis the next week in St. Louis. You could go 4-0. Vanderbilt could be 5-0 in theory. I went with the 2-game stretch, which I know is kind of cheating, but at Kentucky on October 14th, and then South Carolina at home the following week. They'll play
Okay.
LSU in the middle there, but in between LSU and Georgia, they play Kentucky and South Carolina. And if Missouri is going to elevate itself to a 7 or 8 win team this year, take a step forward in the conference, the way some people might believe about this team, you have to beat the teams that are on your level.
Mhm.
And they've played wild, crazy, bonkers games against Kentucky, sort of like Arkansas, Ole Miss, or whatever, and on the other side, and South Carolina. Like you get Kentucky on the road, South Carolina at home. Those 2 games could decide between 6-6 or 8-4.
Yeah,
And those are the 2. And again, I know that's kind of cheating, so I'm sorry, but
that's okay. I'm used to you cheating.
That's fair. South Carolina, who you got?
South Carolina, you go first on this one. I was ready for Tennessee.
Kentucky at home, November 18th. I just mentioned it for Kentucky. This is the game that I think they're going to have Florida at home, which is a big game as well. North Carolina in the non-con is fascinating. Mississippi State's a big game. You're at Georgia, at Tennessee, at A&M, Clemson. A lot of big name games on there, but Kentucky at home to wrap up SEC season. That could be hey, are we 4-4 in the SEC? I don't think it's for bowl eligibility, but it's possible. I think that Kentucky South Carolina game is going to define both of those programs at the end of the year. So November 18th, Kentucky at South Carolina.
I'm going South Carolina or Mississippi State.
Ooh, okay. I
At
like it.
home. It's right after Georgia. You kind of see what your depth looks like when you play a team that's as physical as Georgia. So you have a good read on what you're capable of and your stamina going into the rest of SEC play. Again, it's wedged in between 2 really tough ones, which is, South Carolina, or it's them playing at Georgia, then South Carolina playing at Tennessee. So that month is really tough for them. Tennessee also is extremely important, but it's more far-fetched for them to pull that off in my mind. I think
Tennessee's going to be out for blood in that game.
I agree. So I think you can't put too much of a stake on, when you're playing at Neyland, for the people who have not been, it's just crazy. I talk about all the time. I attribute like partial deafness to Neyland Stadium, but yeah, that game wedged right in between Georgia and Tennessee, which is Mississippi State, is what I went with.
I like it. All right, now our alma maters. We finished up. Tennessee, I've got 2, and one of them includes your Texas A&M Aggies visiting Neyland Stadium. I think Texas A&M is going to win the game. They're going to have a better line of scrimmage. You got Bobby Petrino. You got the quarterback. No one's going to circle it. If you're a Tennessee fan, you're not going to circle it. You're going to think, oh, we got A&M at home. They're terrible last year. Texas A&M is going to be significantly better this year. Now, which game do I think is more important for the definition of the season? At Florida week 3. I could not decide between these two, but that and of course Georgia at home is a huge game as well. So if they're as good as last year, then Georgia's the biggest game. But I don't think they're going to be as good, which means the Florida road trip in week 3 and the A&M game at home, that is the difference between 10-2 or 8-4. And I those two games are the biggest moments because you still have to play at Kentucky, you still got South Carolina at home, but it's at Florida. If you lose that game, you've lost all momentum from last season.
Yeah, it's interesting that theirs is more like a what bad things happen if you lose versus what good things happen if you win. Because most of the other games that we picked, I'm like, this will be great for you to win because the rest of your season will shape up better. And for Tennessee, it's like, what's going to be the worst game for you to lose? And it's weird because when I'm finding myself like on paper, like I don't, there's not that much of a difference to me between like the talent level or the ability to win between Kentucky and Tennessee. But when I'm looking at it, I'm like, I want to just instinctively give things to Tennessee that I probably shouldn't just be
Yeah, that's fair.
giving them.
State of the Union from Adam Sparks coming up in just a minute, by the way.
Yep. So, I mean, God,
there you go.
This one's really hard. I really honestly didn't nail this one down. I mean, I just don't think they can pull off.
So
yeah.
Go both of them. Go A&M for both teams. I think it's a huge game for both teams.
Yeah,
it's more important. It is more important for Tennessee because there are higher expectations and they're at home, and they're coming off a bye week for that matter.
Right, and then you go into Alabama. Yeah. Okay, I'm going A&M
and at Kentucky. All right, Vandy. I went with. You want to go first? You go first.
No,
you go first. I went with the 2-game stretch for Vandy as well. Now the at Wake Forest.
I want to skip you.
The at Wake Forest game is pretty critical because that could define
game is always close
where they are. Yeah, and it's always a good game. Kentucky and Missouri back-to-back at home, September 23rd and September 30th, weeks 4 and 5 back-to-back. Those are the two probably most winnable SEC games of the year. You do have Ole Miss later. You got Florida. You got, there's other games you could win in theory if you improve. But 2 games at home to start SEC play, Kentucky and Missouri, 2 teams that won't be picked in the top 2 in the East. Those are opportunities to pull upsets every Vanderbilt, in my opinion.
I think Missouri is more important. That's what I went with, is more important than Kentucky, because if you beat Kentucky and then you also beat Missouri, amazing. But if you lose to Kentucky and then you reset and you can beat Missouri, you're back on track.
That's valid.
Relatively speaking.
Yep.
So those 2 games pop out to me because I think just anything in that next stint, Florida, Georgia, Ole Miss, Auburn, they're all going to be tough. We normally play South Carolina close. We used to play Ole Miss close all the time, and it's not been as much like that recently. So, yeah, I think it's that reset Missouri game. If you win Kentucky and Missouri, great. If you lose to Kentucky and still beat Missouri, it says something that, at least you can reset and get on the right path.
Hey, nice big step forward, Clark Lee. Here's the final 6 games of your season. At Florida, Georgia, at Ole Miss, Auburn, at South Carolina, at Tennessee. Way to go, Clark. Way to go. SEC office, not doing them. They do get 2 bye weeks in there, which is nice.
The South Carolina, Tennessee end of the season thing didn't used to be as intimidating as it sounds now.
That's true. Used to win a couple of those games against Tennessee. All right. So speaking of the Volunteers, when we come back, our State of the Union with Knoxville News Sentinels, Adam Sparks. Adam, good to see you, man. How are you, sir? Welcome to the show.
Good to be back on. Spring already. It's not spring weather outside, but it's spring enough for football, I suppose.
Well, on Monday this week, it was 78 in Nashville, and today it's like 68 or 70 degrees. Sunshine, the flowers are starting to bloom. It feels pretty springy here in Nashville. So we're going to check in with Knoxville, and we're going to do a State of the Union here today. And I just wanted to start with, I want to do a hypothetical right out of the gate just to blow, for people's brains to explode right away. What does this Tennessee fan base do if they're a pretty good football team in 2023? Joe Milton's a pretty good quarterback. He has his best season, but they finish 8-4. And then they win a bowl game, maybe even they go 9-4. What does the fan base do?
It probably almost completely depends on how Nico is, how you feel about Nico at the end of the year. That's it. Because if this team is 8-4 under Joe Milton, and Nico is not necessarily the guy, it's like, well, this is hit the peak under Hendon Hooker, and now it's just going to crumble and go back down to 6, 7 wins. But if Nico looks the part, then it's just, oh, this is just a small dip. And Nico's going to lead this team to the playoff. So it really depends on that. I mean, so much of college football is determined about quarterback. Look at Texas right now. It's what do you have in the tank at quarterback? And so much of the narrative over this season is going to be Nico and Joe Milton. I'm curious to see in the spring how people react to this too, because we're going to be covering. I'm going to watch Nico every single day at practice. That's the backup quarterback, but that's the beat that I'm going to be on, and that's what people are going to be interested in. And his clock is going to be sped up in fans' eyes by several months. The best thing that happened to I think this team in terms of the fan base is Joe Milton playing pretty well in the Orange Bowl, because it will calm some of the Nico talk down a little bit, but it'll get ramped up as soon as we get into spring practice again.
So I do think that, again, while I have been long critical of Joe Milton as a star quarterback, you also cannot say that Hendon Hooker was the most efficient quarterback in Tennessee history and a Heisman finalist, and then just say, oh, without him, you're going to be totally fine. You can't do that either. I do think it's fair with 2 years in the system, learning behind Hendon Hooker, a lot of experience. I don't think you can expect Orange Bowl Joe Milton, but I think you can expect maybe I think what could be his best season. I don't think that's good enough to replicate 10-2 and what they did last year. So I do think there's a slight step back. Are you suggesting that this is going to be sort of Jalen Hurts to a Tagovailoa, where he's going to get, like, they're blowing somebody out and they're going to go early to Nico to make sure that he gets a lot of reps as a freshman? Is that the kind of vibe you're getting?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think a lot of it is determined on, if you look at the schedule, Tennessee plays Virginia in Nashville. Joe Milton should be pretty good, and they'll beat a bad Virginia team, and so all will be well. They'll blow out Austin Peay, and by the way, Nico will play a lot in that game. Now, if he plays well against Austin Peay, hold on, but then you go to the Swamp, and so that first 3 games you have to determine by then, is this Joe Milton's team the rest of the way, especially if he beats Florida, or is this turn the car over to Nico? And I don't think you want to turn the car over to Nico at the Swamp, so you've got to kind of make the decision somewhere in there. I think a lot of it is going to determine on what the record is. If this is a team that can win 9 or 10 games, regardless of how Joe Milton is playing, you probably stay with Joe. But if this looks like this is a 7-win team, then you hand it over to Nico and see what happens. I do think the Orange Bowl changed a lot of things in that this doesn't seem like a legitimate competition. They may sell it that way a little bit, but this is Joe Milton's job to lose. I don't even think they have to announce him as the starter or the front runner. It's his job, and Nico is there to learn. And by the way, they only have 2 scholarship quarterbacks. So, Nico's not going to be fighting for reps. He's going to get all that he needs in spring.
Yeah, I've always assumed Joe Milton will be the starter and that Nico takes over in 24. There's another one also that just popped into my the Kelly Bryant, Trevor Lawrence situation popped into my head as well, which is, again, even a little bit different than Tua. They fully rested Tua because Jalen Hurts was good enough to lead them back, to the SEC championship. Kelly Bryant wasn't good enough because Trevor Lawrence was that good. I also think Trevor Lawrence is probably more physically developed as a true freshman than maybe Nico is. I think he needs a few more pork chops, but it'll be fascinating to watch. So you alluded to, like, how good the team is. And my first question, I'm not worried about the receiving core or the skill players, but my first question is the defense. We saw what happened at the end of the year. We know the metrics. We know what they are: middle of the pack to bottom half of the SEC. They're losing a couple of key pieces. What do you make of the depth? Are all the young players ready, or is this still a work in progress in your mind on that side of the ball?
Well, it depends on where you're looking at. I think linebacker is going to be fine. They bring in a BYU transfer who's like 25 years old. They'll plug him in. They'll be fine there. The secondary is not going to be good. It couldn't be much worse than it was in terms of pass defense from last year. All the same guys are back. Warren Burrell is back. They're going to plug in Gabe Judy Lawley. people will know him from Vanderbilt a couple years ago. He was at BYU last year. So they're just going to add more bodies to the secondary and see how that goes. One small difference, but I think important, is that last year, virtually every cornerback was out during spring practice. They were all injured. And now almost all of them are going to be here on the field. And so we're going to actually see the competition. We're going to be able to see who they're moving to safety and nickel and elsewhere, because that didn't happen last year until fall camp. So I think the coaches are going to feel better about the secondary maybe than the fan base, or maybe I will by the end of spring, because they'll be able to make more decisions. I mean, Tennessee has won, and Josh Heupel has won with a bad pass defense and a bad secondary. He did it at UCF. He's done it here. So it's kind of one of those things when people complain about how bad the secondary is. I say, well, you went 11-2. The secondary is bad. Couldn't you just do that again if the offense is really good? I think the more pressing issue is the pass rush, and I don't know if they. I mean, do they have a Byron Young? I don't think so. Could they in a couple of years? Maybe. So much of spring now is we like to look at the newcomers, obviously, but the freshmen, everybody gets so excited about the midterm signees and which freshmen are going to pop, and they almost never pop and they almost never play. You're looking at the previous year.
2 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the previous year, a year ago, everybody was excited for Joshua Josephs, James Pierce, Tyree West. Those were their 3 defensive linemen, 2 edge rushers, and then one guy that's sort of a hybrid strong side defensive end. Those 3 guys played some last year, and now this is their second year. Those are the 3 guys that you have to look at to take the next step to be starters or to be impact guys. And Tennessee was pretty good last year on the defensive line about rotating a lot of guys. So all 3 of them will be in there. That's what more I'm looking at on defense, are their dynamic pass rushers, because the secondary was not good last year, probably won't be great this year, but it is what it is.
Does the defensive line or the quarterback take them from 8-4 to 10-2? Like, what is more impactful on the? I mean, obviously, we know quarterback's the most impactful position on the field. I'm just saying, what you're going to kind of get out of Joe Milton. Is it the defensive line that makes the difference, or is it just extra awesome Joe Milton?
Yeah, I mean, part of the question within the question there is, where's Joe Milton's ceiling? I tend to think his ceiling is higher now than I did a year ago, but I still don't think it's Hendon Hooker high. I did a look through a couple weeks ago where I looked at all 191 plays that Joe Milton played last year, because his stats were through the roof. 10 touchdowns, no interceptions. I mean, his passing efficiency was better than Hendon Hooker's. So I went back and looked at those and thought, well, they're all against, Ball State's third stringers, so who cares? But when I went back and looked at it, the majority of his snaps, like 60, 70%, were against starters on SEC teams or Clemson. When I looked at his so-called bad passes he shouldn't have thrown into that, could have been picked off, I counted like 8 or 9 bad passes in the whole year. I mean, Joe Milton was really good last year. And when I looked back at it more and more, I saw that he was much better than I thought, and his numbers were great. So the ceiling may be higher on Joe Milton than certainly you thought, maybe you still think, certainly what I thought. I mean, if they can figure out the right receiving core and they can protect him, this team could put up as many points as they did last year. And if the defense is bad, the defense is bad. I don't think Josh Heupel really, he can say what he wants. I don't think he really goes into seasons thinking, man, this defense has got to be really good or I can't win games. I think he thinks if I can score 50, I'll beat anybody.
Yeah, and I think that's the key is if Joe, and again, I took my 6-year-old shamed me into taking her to the Tennessee Vandy game, because you said a lot of those passes were against Clemson or an SEC team. I'm assuming that's Vanderbilt. And then Clemson in a bowl game, which how much does that count? He still missed a ton of wide open receivers in against Vanderbilt, and it's because he's too strong. It's not because he's a bad quarterback, and we all know how good of a dude he is. He's a great guy, so it's like we're all rooting for him. But just take a little bit off, man. Just take a little bit off. And again, I think he will have his best season. I think I'm not worried about the receivers. I think he's going to do a solid job. I think reasonable expectations for Joe Milton. I feel like Tennessee fans are expecting Hendon Hooker, and I don't think that's fair.
But he again, back to some of the research, people have to look at this on knoxnews.com to look back at it. But
yeah, there you go.
He did miss throws. We think of him as a guy that overthrows all deep passes because they've come in chunks. They came against Bowling Green in his first ever start, right? There were like 6 of them. And against Vanderbilt, there were like 5 of them. And those 2 games made up for like 90% of his overthrows on anything beyond like 20 yards. And you say, well, that's 2 pretty big ones, right? That's 2 starts.
So his last 2 regular season starts.
That's right.
Okay.
So I mean, part of the conversation with him is he a better fill-in guy or relief pitcher than he is a starter? When the pressure is on him and he's starting, he can get amped up and he can overthrow guys. He was phenomenal throwing deep balls in the Clemson game.
Yeah.
He was really good when he came into other games late. Now you can say, well, that was against Ball State or UT Martin or whatever. But there was a receiver there and there was a defender there, and they were defended closely, and he made the throw for 60 yards when he was supposed to throw it 60 yards. So we judge him being terrible on deep balls because we saw them one after the other. And there's sort of this compounded memory that he's been terrible at that. It is his biggest weakness. I don't think it's as bad though as we.
No, I know. And again, some of those post routes against Clemson were phenomenal. They also didn't have 2 first-round draft picks on the defensive line. Tennessee didn't have all their players either, so it's kind of fair there. Again, I do think he's going to have his best season. The 8-yard dig route. Does he need to throw it 108 miles an hour? Probably not. But again, I think to your point earlier. If they're 8-4, but Nico has shown flashes, and Milton's been solid, and Nico has shown flashes, and he's clearly the future, but he's not good enough to take over, which is, I think, what's going to happen. I think Tennessee fans might be a little bummed out by that, but I still think that's a testament to them being able to rebuild quickly. They're going to lose 2 NFL receivers. They're going to lose a potential first-round draft pick in Darnell Wright is flying up draft boards. And of course, they lose their offensive coordinator and their the Heisman caliber quarterback. I just think. I think they're replacing more than you think, and they're still going to be pretty good. And I think that's a credit to Josh Heupel.
Well, a couple things on that. Number one, if they are 8-4, who are the 4 losses to? Are they to Florida, Georgia, and Alabama? Because if they are, people will say that's a step back, and there needs to be repairs and a fix and all that. I think last year, and I've asked a lot of fans this, that were really bummed out about the South Carolina loss. Say, yeah, but would you trade it for Alabama? They said, no.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of who you beat, because South Carolina was a letdown, but the thinking is still the Tennessee team that beat Alabama and that beat Florida. And LSU. That's the real Tennessee team. South Carolina was the outlier.
Here's one. They're going to lose to A&M because A&M is going to be so much better than anyone expects, because all those players from like 2 classes ago are now going to be superstars, like you're talking about. They're going to lose to like Kentucky and Florida and Alabama, and then they're going to beat Georgia.
Beat Georgia would make the year 8-4. But the other thing on that, when you talk about like where could they be in replacing guys, I think that's the big theme of spring right now, because if you look at what they picked up in the portal, I think they got 8 guys. There's a number of those that are sort of 1-to-1 replacements that could be tough. I mean, John Campbell, left tackle from Miami, he's the new Darnell Wright. McCallan Castles from UC Davis, he's the new Princeton Fant. Dante Thornton from Oregon is the new Jalen Hyatt or Cedric Tillman. It depends on where they put him. Keenan Peely is the new Jeremy Banks. So are you going to be able to hit on all those? Because if you hit on all those, you'll be as good as last year. If you hit on half of them, you're going to take a little bit of step back. And so I think it's going to be easier this spring to just see, hey, is that new guy as good as what the old guy was? And I think that's an interesting thing with the portal now.
How much credit with Hendon Hooker's development, the offensive success, does Alex Golesh get?
I mean, a pretty good amount. I'm glad for Golesh that he got a head coaching job, because that was the time to strike to get that job, because I think he's a really good offensive mind. I think he added a lot to what Josh Heupel had, but this is Josh Heupel's offense. That's Josh Heupel's quarterback. I think Josh Heupel, he seems extremely humble, but there's an ego in there, and I think he thinks he can plug and play with different coaches, and that's why he elevated Joey Halsley to OC. So it helped. There was a tremendous relationship, sort of a triad there of Joey Halsley, Alex Golish, and Josh Heupel, and they were all on the same page. And Hendon Hooker could kind of go to different ones for different things. And so they've got to uphold that now, because now it's just two guys, Halsley in two positions and Heupel. And that'll be interesting to see if they can lend the same support to Joe Milton. And by the way, Joe Milton kind of has two responsibilities now. He's the starting quarterback. He's the new Hendon Hooker. He'll try to mimic him in some ways, but then he's also has the responsibility of being to Nico what Hendon Hooker was to Joe Milton. Because even though Hendon Hooker and Joe Milton were both older guys and had been around, if you talk to those two guys, Hendon Hooker was a 40-year-old man and Joe Milton was still a 19-year-old. I mean, if you got to practice that, Hendon Hooker was over talking to the coaches with gray hair, and Joe Milton was dancing with the freshmen. And that's just the two different dynamics that you have with those guys. And both of those are phenomenal, and both of those can work. But it's just sort of a different thing. And I'll be interested to see the body language of Joe Milton and how he reacts to Nico, because all that he has told us is that that's my little brother. I'm going to bring him along. But he's probably going to bring him along a little differently than Hendon Hooker brought him along.
Can you put into perspective? You've covered 3 different teams in the state. Can you put into perspective anybody that comes close to Hendon Hooker, like holistically, as a talent on the field, off the field, a personality, the leadership, the maturity? Is there anybody that you think of that you put in that category?
Boy, that's a tough one. Oren Burks, linebacker at Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
When all the kneel for the anthem stuff was happening, went to Oren Burks and had like an hour-long conversation about it. And he didn't really want to talk about football, and he had some really nuanced thoughts about it. I remember riding around him with in his car one time. It's another long story, but talking about civil rights history and then talking about academics. And this is a guy who was a high-end draft pick for the Packers at that time. Hendon Hooker's kind of that. Hendon Hooker's he does sort of the circuit now where he goes and speaks to like church groups and I think some kids and schools. And then he also does commercials, and he pops up everywhere and seems to blend in fine with like the 12-year-old girl that can't believe I'm sitting here talking to Hendon Hooker, and then also the 70-year-old man who just wants to talk about other things. And
what a jerk. What a jerk.
That's right. Oren Burke says, there's a little bit of, I covered Kevin Byard too when he was at
I was going to say.
Tennessee. There's a little bit of Kevin Byard there too. There's the guy that, if the head coach had to, had the flu and had to step away and he needed a substitute teacher, I got to pick a player coach for the week. Kevin Byard, Oren Burks, and Hendon Hooker.
There you go.
They're the ones that would step into that role and would keep everybody on task.
That is a damn good trio in the state of Tennessee. That is for sure, man. You've had some good dudes to cover, man. Always a pleasure, my man. Adam, of course, you can catch him all over the internet. We kept you way too long, so we do appreciate you. Thank you so much, and enjoy spring ball, buddy.
Yep, good to be on. Thanks.
100,000 views for Nico. 100,000 views.
All we can get.
That was Adam Sparks. Everybody follow his work, man. He's awesome. Literally married into a season ticket holder family up there in Knoxville and has to deal with it like when he comes home from work.
It's weird
So
to
much
hear
fun.
Adam in conjunction with Knoxville still.
Yep. You're not used to it yet, are you?
I'm not.
You hung out with him in the Hawkins Field press box too many times.
Mhm.
All right. Well, that just about does it. I think we'll give some hats away next week. We took a break from that. Thanks to Adam Sparks for hanging out with us. Georgia, Kirby, just put your foot down, man. You can still win championships. Put your foot down. And I hope you guys enjoyed the most important games of the 2023 season in March. For Erin Dugan, my name is Braden Gall. Everybody out there, have a great weekend. We'll talk to you next week. This has been Fringe Element here on the 440 Sports Network.
Yeah, Athens needs to be in timeout.